So once you're satisfied with your sketch, you can move on to the shading. So I'm just going over my sketch and darken where it needs to be a bit darker. So this is the 2B and I'm holding it more to the back so that I can shade with the side of the pencil lead. And then start to put down the first graphite layer. Smoothen this all out and also go, well, I take a clean part first because see that graphite? Then you might darken that layer. Take a clean part, go over this highlight. Now with the 4B, I'm going to go over the crease line here because that's a bit darker. So again, take your time, try to enjoy yourself because we're going to build up the layers one by one, starting with the lightest pencil grade and then building up your layers and then starting with one part of the eye, then the other eye, and then moving on to the other face features. So remember that drawing a portrait takes time, and I know that starting a portrait can be a bit scary because you never know if it will turn out as you hoped. You will need to get past that fear and try to tell yourself that this is supposed to be a fun process, and even though you make mistakes, it's part of the process. It's part of the process of learning something because we need to fail if we want to learn something. I mean, it's part of the process with learning anything new. You will need to make mistakes to move forward, to improve yourself. Because if you're scared of making mistakes, you won't learn from them. Your hand needs to be trained, and you'll need to train your eyes to look for details that are important or look for things in your drawing that you can correct. And you won't be good at that right away because it will take time to improve your hands to draw the way you want them to, and to improve your eyes to look for details and things you can change or correct. So where I see the shadows in here, this is the 4B, so I'm going to darken the shadow on this part and here. So it's normal for us to compare ourselves to others, but we need to remember that we're all on a different part of our journey. So maybe someone is already drawing for 5 years, someone else already for 2 years, or someone else for 1 year. And you just started out for maybe a few months and you're already comparing yourself to someone else, and that's not fair to yourself because you need to allow yourself to also be improving and be drawing for a while and allowing yourself to practice and allowing yourself to make mistakes to learn from. So it's important, and it's also completely normal to feel like if it didn't work out or if you're having a hard time and struggling, because that's also one thing. We don't see someone else's struggle. We just see the end result of someone, but you don't see that that person struggled and maybe erased an eye 5 times over and then tried it again. You don't see that part of the struggle. You only see your own struggle, and then you might get frustrated about yourself and thinking, oh, they succeeded, why am I struggling so much? But we all go through those struggles, especially in the beginning. And with time and practice, dedication and improvement, it will get better and you will get past those struggles. So try not to demotivate yourself if it doesn't turn out right away. I'm going to shade this part. So with the 6B, I'm going to start drawing the lashes. Go over the iris again. And I draw it with quick movement. Pay attention to the direction. And you see that this one here in the middle is a bit thicker. And try not to draw them all next to each other and all the same size. So some are a bit thicker and darker. So with the graphite that's already on the stump, it's okay if it turns out just a bit darker. With the soft tissue, I go over it to smoothen it even more. So drawing portraits is really challenging and more challenging than other subjects, but you will learn a lot from it. You really will. So if we look at a drawing from someone else, we think, oh, that's beautiful, you did such a great job. But if we look at our own drawing, we immediately just look at the mistakes we made, or we are too hard on ourselves and on our own drawings. So try to keep that in mind, that someone else looks different at your drawing than you. And drawing the eyes always takes the longest, because drawing the eyes can be the most challenging. Well, that's what I think, because the eyes are the most important part of the portrait. That's the first thing that you look at when you look at a portrait. Okay, this is the 4B, adding those shadows. So being an artist isn't just about drawing, it's also really about mindset. Changing your mindset, becoming satisfied with your own pieces of art, with your own creations. And behind every piece of art, behind every drawing is a story. The story of the artist, the struggles, but that's the story of the artist. And you can tell your story if you like, but you can also keep it to yourself. I carefully go over it with smaller strokes, so I'm sure that I don't draw it too high or too low, but I carefully go over the sketch line. So make sure your pencil tip is sharp. If your pencil tip is a bit dull, then you won't be able to draw those thinner lines. And then with quick strokes, draw the lashes. And pay attention to the direction. It should be a bit thicker. And I see this shadow. Now I'm going to use the black pencil, go over the darkest details in the eyes. So when you go over them, pay attention that you don't thicken them too much. If you need to sharpen your pencil in between again, you can do that. I keep turning my tip, the tip of the pencil. Don't smudge it too much, just a bit. So to create the illusion of that the eyeball is round and really going into this corner here, I will need to add some shading here. So that will make it look like the eyeball is round. Darken the upper eyelashes. Because if you keep on focusing on the eyes, you might not see something. So when that happens, move on and look back with fresh eyes. Make sure you're using really light pressure, because especially here, the skin is really light. I'm using light to medium pressure when I use the soft tissue. And I go over some areas more often. There's always a shadow under the nose, because the nose is sticking out a bit. There should always be a shadow. And with the blending stump. And here the tip of the nose. And this part. So the darker areas in the nose, just go over that with the blending stump. Remember, it's not really about details, but values and the correct proportions are the most important if you want to create likeness in your portrait. So details come at last, and they can make a difference. They can really make your drawing pop. By drawing the sketch, we focused on the proportions, and now we're focusing on all of the values. And I like to go over the whole upper lip. You see that highlight in the upper lip, starting with the cheek here. And you see that I hold my pencil to the back, and I keep on turning my pencil once in a while to keep my tip sharp. And remember that you use the same amount of pressure the whole time. So if you're still finding that difficult, that will all come with practice, because the more you draw, the more your hand will get used to it. If you look at this part of the chin and the lip, about 1/3 is where I see that wrinkle of the chin, where you see that shadow. So look for all of those value changes. And here, you see that when you smoothen this with the soft tissue, it already makes a difference. Now with the 4B, go over the part between the lips, and the upper lip is also a bit darker. With the smaller blending stump, going over this. Now back to the 4B, I need to darken this part and then shade here. So it can be difficult if you think about drawing eyes, drawing a nose, drawing lips, but you will just need to start. So I don't think about the end result now. I just think about the first layer of graphite, the second layer of graphite. I don't look at my drawing now and judge it. You can't judge your drawing by the first layers or the layers in between. So I'm focusing on the features that I'm drawing now and just keep on going. And we all get these doubts in between, especially in the middle stages. So I'm using really light pressure with the 6B. If your 6B is too dark, you can use the 4B, going over everything I just put down. You need to darken the middle line. Now with the small blending stump, you see that part around the corners, it's a bit darker, so I'm just going to smudge this. And those shadows in his face, because he's squeezing his lips together and his chin, you get these shadows on his face. So recreate that as well, because that will create more lightness in your drawing. When we're going to shade the neck, we can look back at this value, see if we need to darken. This iris still doesn't look wide enough in comparison to the left one. Add a bit more here. Just darken, making sure these values are dark enough. Going over some parts of the eyebrow to darken. And darken this side. And with the kneaded eraser, you see that the forehead looks one value. So I'm going to lighten the middle part a bit with the kneaded eraser. Make a bigger part so you don't get any eraser lines, and gently put it down and then pull it up. So remember that if you want to create something round, you will need to have the highlight, and then where you see that the value changes, it curves, and then here it curves even more because of the darker value. If you have just one value here, his nose would look flat, and same for his forehead. Just like when you're going to draw a sphere, you will need to create all of these values from the midtones to the shadow, core shadow, because if you just have one value, then it would look like a flat circle. So remember that the face, you will also need to create those values. And the same for the cheeks. If you have one value, then his cheeks will look flat. If you have the corner of the mouth, the shirt, and then you see this line here. And then it's a bit darker here. And then I'm also going to go over the shirts. And you see that you now see a line. So you want to make sure that the line is the same value as the value on the neck, so that you have a smooth transition. Okay, now you don't see a line, but you see more like a shadow here under the chin. So his neck should be darker because his face or his head is on top of his neck. So that's creating a shadow. And then here on this side darker. Because even though a shirt is white, you still see different values because of the wrinkles in the shirt. With the blending stump, gently soften those edges. And again, darken the shadow here on the sides. I build up the layers gradually, because if you just go in with a dark pencil, create a line, try to blend it, you won't get that soft, blended look. You see from his shirt that reflected light here on the cheek. So you see a lighter part and then the shadow. And I'm going to go over this part because this highlight is too bright here. You know, the contrast is a bit too strong. Let's go over this with the soft tissue and see if that helps with getting those smooth transitions back. So you still want to see that highlight, but not too bright in comparison to the rest. So I'm going to start on the left side with the 4B. When I draw hair, so I don't look at the whole piece, I look at these sections I see. So here I see a curl. I'm not going to go over that part because the background, I'm just going to leave it white. So now with the 6B, and I'm going to darken all of the hair sections that I just created, and then look at where it should be bit darker, to follow the direction of the hair, you see. So the first layers can look a bit messy, but once we add highlights and then darken the darker parts some more, so you need to go past those first layers and those ugly stages. Don't think of the end result yet. And then look at all of those lighter parts you see in the hair. Those are highlights. And then clean it off in between. Because if you don't clean the pencil, you will just be smudging graphite instead of erasing if the tip is dirty. Now with the 4B, I'm going to add those shadows. Here's you see a shadow under the curl. So I'm going to darken everything. Because if you look at his eyes, you see that it's the same value. Look at the darkest parts. So darken the parts here next to the face. Now let's blend this all with the blending stump. Make it look a bit more softer. So drawing hair also takes time, but you will need to go layer by layer by layer. And don't use too hard pressure right away, because we still want to be able to erase some highlights. Because the black pencil is a bit more difficult to erase. And the highlights aren't that bright, so you don't have to erase fully. Now with the blending stump, also going over some of the highlights because, again, they aren't that bright. And that's how I create hair, draw hair. Going over the ear again. I'm just going to start with the 6B because he has really dark hair, so the same as the other side. I'm going to look at each curl. So it's easier to draw curly hair because you see all of these sections. So look at the direction, but still curly straight hair can be challenging to draw hair. So what I do with anything I draw, I look at the values I see and make sure they are the same. And with the face, you really need to look at the proportions, but with hair, you don't really have to pay attention to that. It's the direction of the hair is more important and the values. So recreate the midtones, and then the highlights are important, and the shadows. And remember, don't use really hard pressure because you want to be able to erase highlights later on. So here it's all just dark, so I'm just going to roughly fill in this part. I'm also going to go over this part because it's dark under the hair. If you go too dark with these ones, you want to blur them a bit more. I just use the kneaded eraser and then lighten them up a bit so that they're a bit more to the back with the black pencil. So I'm using light to medium pressure where I see those darker parts. But now you see that his face can also be a bit darker some parts. So that's what we're going to do later on once we finish the hair. And you see that if you look at the reference photo, his hair is really black. So the darkest parts in his hair, the shadow areas, they are really dark. So this is another layer with the black pencil. And I'm going to blur those edges with the blending stump. So I'm using really light pressure not to darken it too much here. So I keep on looking back at the reference photo, looking at all of those different curls. Just pay attention to the direction and to the values. And drawing hair takes a lot of time. And if you don't feel like continuing or you feel like you're rushing it, come back some other time or take a short break. Because, like I always say, if you rush, then you will see it in the end result. I build up the layers because you want to be able to add highlights with the eraser. His darker hair makes his face pop more. But now we will need to darken the shadows a bit more in his face, otherwise it will look a bit flat. And now the more layers you have, the more difficult it is to erase. So you see that I go over it a few times and clean it off. If the part you erased is turned out a bit too thick, then you can just gently go back with the black pencil and then go over the sides of that part to make it a bit more thinner. I think with the black pencil, darken the shadow using light pressure. And then for these lighter hair strokes on his face, I'm going to go over it with the soft tissue. Because if I go over it with the blending stump, I might darken them too much. Here, shading a bit, just with the black pencil, to darken it all here on this side. Because now you're just focusing on the hair the whole time, and you might not feel satisfied looking at every hair stroke that you're not happy with. But once you step back, look at your drawing with fresh eyes, you will look at it differently, and it's even better to make a picture. So I'm going over some parts to make sure that it's darker in value. This part looks a bit light here. I'm going to use the blending stump. That's the skin under his hair. Using the 4B, I'm going to darken this part of the cheek a bit more and this part of the forehead, because this side should be a bit darker. With the black pencil, I'm going to darken the eyes a bit more. And with the 4B, I'm going to darken the upper lip a bit. Also with the blending, the small stump over these parts. Okay, I think I'm overall satisfied with how this little boy turned out. Remember to take your time and take short breaks in between. And you see that if you look at your drawing from different angles, you see different light. The graphite looks different because of the light shining on the graphite. So also pay attention to that when you take a picture of your drawing, that the light isn't shining too harsh on the graphite.